Scattered around in the sand are thousands of chunks of strange yellow-green glass.
The Sahara is already one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. Endless sand, scorching heat, and a history full of strange, unexplained mysteries.
The remains of 50,000 Persian soldiers, all thought to have vanished without a trace, may finally be coming to light after 2,500 years.
But every now and then, it reveals something so bizarre that even scientists are left speechless.
The tombs contain not only adults and children but also 15 intact mummies, some of them with hair, skin and clothing still visible.
Like the human bones. In the year 2000, Paul Sereno, a paleontologist known for pulling dinosaur bones out of places most people wouldn't even think to look, found himself in the middle of Niger's Tenere Desert. He and his team were on a mission, searching for fossils because that's what Sereno did best. But instead of a dinosaur, they found something that sent a whole different kind of chill down their spines. It started with photographer Mike Hetwer, who, while wandering through the dunes, noticed something strange poking out of the sand. At first, it looked like your standard bits of broken pottery, maybe some beads, a few arrowheads, but then there were bones, human bones, a lot of them, just lying there, waiting to be seen. No one was expecting this. Dinosaurs, sure, but an entire human burial site? That was something else entirely. The team took a step back, called in a drone, and let the machine do the first sweep. What it revealed was absolutely insane. This wasn't just some random scattering of old bones. There were burials, hundreds of them, more than 200 to be exact. That's when it hit them. This was Gobero, the largest Stone Age cemetery in Africa, hidden beneath the shifting sands for thousands of years. But here's the thing about history. The more you find, the more questions it throws at you. Because while it was clear that people had lived and died here a long time ago, there was still the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a normal cemetery. See, back then, the Sahara wasn't the dry, scorching wasteland it is today. It was green, full of rivers, lakes, and animals that have no business existing in the desert we know now. This was a place where people thrived. So, what the hell happened? Why did this site, once a home to the living, turn into a graveyard? One of the eeriest discoveries was the skeletons of a woman and 2 children, locked in what can only be described as a final embrace. They were lying there, holding on to each other, frozen in time. What exactly had happened to them? The obvious explanation, a tragic accident. Maybe they drowned. Maybe disease swept through and took them all at once. But then, there's the other possibility. What if something else happened here? Something buried so deep in history that we'll never really know the truth. One minute, you're looking at a lost civilization's graveyard, and the next, you're staring at something that doesn't even look real. That's where the Richat structure comes in. If you've ever wanted proof that the Earth can be just as weird as anything you'd find in space, let me introduce you to the Richat structure. Sounds fancy, right? That's because it is, but most people know it by a different name, the Eye of the Sahara. And once you see it, you'll get why astronauts literally use it as a landmark from space. Out in the middle of Mauritania, smack in the middle of nowhere, there's this massive, perfectly circular formation that looks like someone punched a giant bullseye into the desert. We're talking about a structure that's 40 to 50 kilometers across. That's big enough to swallow an entire city. If you were wandering around on foot, you probably wouldn't even notice it. But from above, it's impossible to miss. For the longest time, people thought it was a meteor impact. I mean, look at it. Huge, round, smack in the middle of an otherwise featureless desert. It screams, something from space hit this spot. Except when scientists actually checked, there was zero evidence of an impact. No shock metamorphism, no deformed rocks, none of the usual scars that come from a high-speed collision with something from beyond Earth. So, if it wasn't a meteor, then what the hell was it? Turns out, the real story is even wilder. This thing started forming over 100 million years ago, back when Pangaea was breaking apart. As the continents start drifting away from each other, the ground beneath what is now the Eye of the Sahara weakened. Magma from deep below pushed up, causing the land to rise into a massive dome. But nature is never content to just leave things alone, and over millions of years, wind, water, and time itself started eroding away the layers, leaving behind the giant rings we see today. And those rings, they're made up of some of the oldest rocks on the planet. The center of the structure holds late Proterozoic rocks that go back 2.5 billion years, while the outer edges are lined with much younger sandstone from about 480 million years ago. The rocks themselves are no joke either. There's sedimentary rock, metamorphic rock, and a whole lot of igneous rock that came from ancient volcanic activity. Ever heard of kimberlite? That's the rock that sometimes carries diamonds. The Eye of the Sahara has that. Rhyolite, that's volcanic rock that forms from lava flows. It has that too. Gabbro, carbonatite, and basalt, all present and accounted for. Now, while we're talking about things dropping from the sky into the Sahara, let's add another one to the list. This time, it's not just bones or ancient relics, but a satellite.
The Reuven-Ramadi High-Energy Solar Spectroscopic Imager is expected to crash back to Earth's atmosphere on Wednesday.
On April 19, 2023, NASA's RESI satellite, short for the Reuven-Ramadi High-Energy Solar Spectroscopic Imager, came crashing back down to Earth after spending over 2 decades in space. This satellite was not lightweight either. It weighed about 660 pounds and had been up there since 2002, orbiting around and helping scientists study the sun. You know, doing things like snapping X-ray and gamma-ray pics of solar flares, which, at the time, was a whole new way of looking at solar activity. It was pretty cool. It worked like a champ until 2018, when it started losing its mojo. That's when it went silent, but the mission was still considered a major success. Fast forward to April 20th, 2023, and RESI made its grand return. It didn't exactly stick to the landing. The US military confirmed it had crashed in the Sahara Desert, right near the border of Sudan and Egypt. But if there's one thing the desert loves, it's irony. You'd think the last place you'd find whales would be in the middle of an arid, lifeless stretch of sand, right? Well, think again, because deep in the Egyptian desert, there's a valley filled with something straight out of a prehistoric fever dream. Fossilized whales. You know how sometimes the desert feels like it's just empty, endless nothingness? Well, out in Egypt's western desert, there's a place that's the exact opposite of nothing. It's like a fossil treasure trove, packed with the kind of proof that life wasn't always what we know it to be. Welcome to Wadi al-Hitan, aka Whale Valley, which sounds cool enough already, right? Located just 150 kilometers southwest of Cairo, this place is like the world's ultimate whale evolution museum, except it's all laid out in the desert naturally. Over 400 fossilized skeletons have been found here, mostly of archaic whales. These are not your average fossils either. They're crazy and well preserved. You've got skeletons from 40 to 50 million years ago, dating back to the Eocene period, when the area wasn't a desert at all, but was covered in a shallow sea. That's right, this whole region was once underwater, with marine life thriving. And these whales, they were in the middle of one of the wildest evolutionary changes in history, going from land animals to ocean mammals. The coolest part? Wadi al-Hitan is the only place where you can see entire families of these ancient whales in their natural, untouched setting. You can practically watch the process unfold. Some of these skeletons even have tiny hind limbs, feet, and toes, things you wouldn't expect to see on a creature that's now totally at home in the water. And the fossils here aren't just a bunch of random bones scattered around. These are some of the best preserved fossils anywhere. Many are complete or nearly complete and still intact. You can see how their bodies adapted over time. Hind limbs shrunk and things shifted to make them more aquatic. This place is like Earth's own natural time capsule. It all started back in 1902, when a guy named H.J.L. Beadnell first uncovered these petrified whale skeletons. Fast forward to 1989, and paleontologists made an even crazier discovery: fully aquatic whales with legs and feet still hanging around in the mix, showing just how crazy this transition really was. But ancient whale bones aren't the only mind-blowing thing the desert has been keeping hidden. Libyan desert glass.
It is really a mysterious glass, and we scientists are still kind of puzzled how these things formed.
The desert has a way of keeping secrets, and some of them are buried right under our feet, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. Take the scattered shards of Libyan desert glass, for example. This stuff isn't just any ordinary glass. It's ancient, rare, and probably the result of something crashing into Earth with the kind of force that's impossible to imagine. Found across the vast emptiness of the eastern Sahara, in parts of western Egypt and eastern Libya, this glass is mostly made of le chatelierite, a form of silica that only forms at insanely high temperatures. We're talking hotter than lava high. Scientists have spent years arguing over what exactly could have created it. Volcanic eruptions? Too weak. Lightning strikes? Not even close. The most likely explanation? A cosmic-level disaster. Some researchers think a meteorite slammed into the desert with enough force to liquefy the sand beneath it, turning it into molten glass before it cooled into the pieces scattered across the dunes today. Others argue that it wasn't a direct impact at all, but rather a massive explosion in the atmosphere, like the kind that happened over Tunguska in 1908, where the heat from the fireball was enough to melt the sand below. Either way, whatever happened here wasn't small, and this isn't just some unremarkable debris left behind by history. Libyan desert glass has been catching people's attention for a long time. Ancient Egyptians carved it into tools and jewelry. In fact, one of the most famous pieces of this mysterious glass is embedded in none other than King Tut's burial mask. That shining yellowish-green gemstone, yeah, that's desert glass, sitting right in the middle of one of the most famous artifacts ever discovered. Some versions of this glass aren't just yellow or green. There are accounts of something even rarer, black desert glass. Scientists are still debating what it is, but some believe it could be linked to cristobalite, another form of high-temperature silica. And if you dive into the more mystical side of things, people claim this glass has some kind of strange energy tied to transformation and higher consciousness. The desert has a habit of keeping things locked away for millions of years, whether it's cosmic glass forged in a fireball or ancient creatures frozen in time. But sometimes it doesn't just preserve objects. Sometimes it holds on to people. And that brings us to one of the strangest, most unsettling discoveries ever made beneath the sands. The Tarim Basin mummies. The Tarim Basin is one of the loneliest, bone-dry spots on the planet. It's a harsh, unforgiving stretch of desert, boxed in by mountains that make getting in or out nearly impossible. And yet, hidden beneath all that sand, researchers have uncovered something absolutely wild. Hundreds of mummies that are so amazingly preserved. Some still have their hair intact. And we're not talking about any old hair here. We're talking blonde, red, and deep brown locks, all braided and curled in a way that feels way more European Bronze Age than what you'd expect deep in what is now Western China. And these weren't your typical Chinese burials at all. The people had long noses, high cheekbones, and dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged in a Celtic village. Think simple twill tunics and tartan leggings, and there was even one person wearing a bright red robe that could easily pass for a warrior's outfit from ancient Austria. It was bizarre, and it totally flipped the script on what everyone thought they knew about the region. These Tarim mummies are seriously ancient, dating back to around 2000 BCE. Unlike the fancy Egyptian mummies that were carefully wrapped in linen, these folks were left to the desert, which did all the hard work. The scorching heat dried them out and kept them almost perfectly preserved for thousands of years. Some even still show tattoos on their skin, like marks from another era. Researchers even found traces of milk in their teeth, clear proof that they were into dairy, probably making stuff like cheese or yogurt back in the day. They grew wheat and millet, set up basic irrigation, and somehow carved out a life in a place that today looks almost impossible to live in. For a long time, nobody really knew where these people came from. Theories were flying around, left and right. Were they lost travelers from Europe? Did they come from the Western steppes? Or maybe they were some mysterious group that bridged east and west. When scientists finally dug into their DNA, they discovered something even more surprising. These mummies weren't the descendants of outsiders from Europe or the steppes at all. Instead, they belonged to an ancient local group that had been hanging around in the area for thousands of years, totally cut off from the rest of the world. And get this, even though they were pretty much isolated, they still picked up farming and herding tricks from their neighbors, borrowing bits of culture without really mixing in completely. If there's one thing the Tarim mummies prove, it's that the past is never as simple as we think. The world has always been full of weird, unexpected connections, and sometimes history leaves behind clues so strange they almost feel like they don't belong. Take, for example, the statues in White Desert. This place is covered in massive, ghostly white rock formations that seem like they were sculpted by some ancient civilization, but no humans carved these. They weren't built by lost pharaohs or placed here by aliens. The desert itself made them, shaping these towering, chalky figures over millions of years, slowly worn down by nothing but wind and time. This whole place used to be underwater, back when Egypt wasn't all sand and scorching heat. About 70 million years ago, a shallow sea covered this land, and over time, all the marine gunk, shells, corals, and tiny creatures settled and hardened into soft limestone. Then, the water disappeared, leaving behind this massive blank canvas. And the wind, that's the artist. It's been at work ever since, carving and shaping the landscape like some moody sculptor who only works in slow motion. The result? A desert filled with giant formations that look like everything from mushrooms to chickens to things so bizarre no one even bothers naming them. One of the most famous formations is called the chicken because, well, it looks like a chicken. There's also the mushroom, which stands like some kind of oversized fungus growing out of the desert floor. But really, half the fun is wandering around and coming up with your own names. You'll see rocks that look like frozen waves, animal shapes, even eerie humanoid figures standing motionless against the horizon. Some people swear certain formations look like figures huddling together, as if they're locked in conversation. Others think they resemble giant, ancient creatures that got caught in a sandstorm and never made it out. As if the White Desert wasn't already weird enough, Egypt has another surprise hidden beneath its sands, something far older and much, much bigger. Meet Mansoura Saurus Shaheen.
This is Africa's most complete dinosaur skeleton from the late Cretaceous period.
A dinosaur that once stomped around North Africa when the Sahara was still lush and full of life. Egypt isn't exactly the first place that comes to mind when you think of dinosaurs, but surprise, the Sahara used to be a dinosaur stomping ground. And not just any dinosaurs, we're talking about Mansoura Saurus Shaheen, a massive long-necked giant that lived around 80 million years ago, back when the Sahara wasn't an endless stretch of sand, but a lush green landscape full of life. The bones of this prehistoric beast were discovered by a team from Mansoura University, led by paleontologist Hesham Salem. And this wasn't just any fossil find. African dinosaur fossils from this time period are insanely rare, so stumbling across a nearly complete skeleton, that's like winning the dinosaur lottery. And Mansurosaurus was no small fry. This guy was about 26 to 33 feet long and weighed around 11,000 pounds, which is basically an African elephant on steroids. When scientists studied the bones, they realized this dinosaur had more in common with some dinosaurs from Europe and Asia than it did with ones found in Africa or South America. That's huge. It means that dinosaurs in Africa weren't completely cut off from the rest of the world, like people once thought. There were still connections, still ways for these prehistoric giants to move around before the continents fully drifted apart. In other words, Mansurosaurus just helped rewrite what we know about dinosaur migration and evolution. Speaking of ancient Egypt, let's talk about one of the weirdest and most mysterious stories in its history. The Lost Army of Cambyses. 50,000 soldiers, gone, just like that. No bodies, no weapons, no sign they were ever there. 1 minute, they were marching through the burning hot Egyptian desert, and the next, swallowed by the sands. If that doesn't sound like some ancient X-Files level mystery, I don't know what does. The story goes back to 524 BCE, when Cambyses II, the king of the Persian Empire, was fresh off his conquest of Egypt. He was on a power trip, convinced he could control everything, and decided to send an army to the Siwa Oasis to deal with the Oracle of Amun, a priesthood that basically told rulers what the gods thought of them. Cambyses wasn't the kind of guy who liked being questioned, so he figured he'd just march in, shut them up, and move on. But the desert had other plans. According to Herodotus, the Greek historian who loved a good dramatic tale, Cambyses' army marched into the western desert, and then nature turned against them. A massive sandstorm, the kind that could strip flesh from bone, rolled in out of nowhere. The entire army was buried alive, lost under waves of sand, never to be seen again. Just imagine it, tens of thousands of men, armor glinting in the sun, walking straight into what might as well have been a supernatural death trap. For centuries, people assumed it was just an exaggeration, a failed military campaign, covered up with a spooky story. But then, in 2009, Italian archaeologists found something chilling near Siwa Oasis. Bronze weapons, arrowheads, human bones. Could it really be them? Some experts say the sandstorm theory might actually be true, that the desert just erased them in one brutal storm. Others think the army was ambushed by rebels, wiped out before they even reached their destination. Either way, nobody really knows for sure what happened. But if you think the desert swallowing an entire army is wild, let's talk about something even older. Way older. Long before empires, before kings, before written history itself, someone took a walk in the mud. And millions of years later, that casual stroll changed everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The Laetoli footprints. 3.6 million years ago, someone, or rather something, took a walk, just an ordinary stroll, nothing special, except it kind of was, because that little walk ended up being one of the most important moments in the history of human evolution. And thanks to a lucky combination of wet volcanic ash and time, we can still see exactly where their feet landed, as if they just walked through the mud yesterday. This all went down in Laetoli, Tanzania, where a team, led by the legendary paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey, was digging around in 1976. They were expecting fossils, maybe some stone tools, the usual. Instead, they found footprints, human footprints. Well, sort of. They belonged to Australopithecus afarensis, an early ancestor of ours, the same species as the famous fossil Lucy. And these weren't just any footprints. They were a full-on trail, stretching nearly 90 feet, with around 70 clear steps. That's a whole family walk frozen in time. These early humans were walking like, well, humans. Their big toes were lined up neatly with the rest of their feet. No awkward splayed-out toes like you'd see in chimps. That's a big deal, because it proves that bipedal walking, the very thing that makes humans human, was already locked in millions of years before Homo sapiens showed up. What other discoveries do you think are waiting to be found in the Sahara? Maybe other deserts are hiding even crazier stuff.